Here's a question. In a world of endless female birth control choices, why are there only two widely available male contraceptive options, condoms and vasectomies? Despite overwhelming demand for new methods, the development of male contraception remains an uphill battle, shrouded in stigma, lack of funding, and complex scientific hurdles. Today, we're digging into why that is and what it could mean for the future of global reproductive health. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Global Health Pursuit, a podcast for beginner learners, seasoned public health professionals, and fans who just love hearing inspiring stories from leaders working to make the world a better place. My name is Hetal Baman, and joining me today is Heather Vahdat, Executive Director at Male Contraceptive Initiative, a nonprofit on a mission to expand male contraceptive options that are safe, reversible, and effective. Heather shares her journey from zoology to public health, the human stories behind the science, and why the next generation's voice is crucial in demanding reproductive autonomy. We'll uncover the realities of clinical trials, explore the transformative impact male contraception could have on reducing global poverty, and tackle the challenges holding back this much-needed innovation. Whether you're a newcomer or well-versed in reproductive health, this episode will open your eyes to the untapped potential of male contraception and the complex journey it faces to become a viable option. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with someone who might find it valuable. Your support helps to keep this one-woman show going and makes it 1% better every single day. Before we get into it, I do want to mention that this episode is proudly supported by Male Contraceptive Initiative. The mission at MCI is to empower men and couples to fully contribute to their family planning goals by providing them the resources they need for reproductive autonomy. Learn more about Male Contraceptive Initiative by visiting them on the web at malecontraceptive.org. More about them later. I'm so excited to talk about this because you and I met at the university's Allied for Essential Medicine's Humanity for Science. That was quite a few months ago. When we spoke about what you did, and I was there for your presentation too, I was like, this is so cool. Male contraception, who thinks about that? You know, I spoke about this to my husband, and he was just very confused. He just had so many questions.
Is that a thing?
Right. Is that a thing? But before we get into that, it's so funny because I will stalk my guests just a little bit before the interview. Obviously, I'm a podcast host, so I need to do a little bit of research. What was so interesting is that I went all the way back in your LinkedIn profile and I saw that you have a degree in zoology and animal biology.
So I started out that way.
It's so funny because I was like, okay. Animal biology, male contraception, where's the link there?
It's actually really funny because I've been sort of searching my whole career, figuring out what I was going to do. You know, I knew I loved science. I knew I loved biology. And so I thought I wanted to do genetics. And so that's why I started out the school that I went to, NC State. That was sort of the program that tracked into the genetics side. And then I ended up transferring and finishing in biology. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do next? And my advisor was like, well, do you want to go to medical school? And I was like, Lord, no one wants me to go to medical school. And then it was like, well, there were 3 options. It was like, well, do you want to work in a lab? And I'm like, not really. Like, I like science, but I want a little bit more in my day to day. And then he was like, well, go to public health school. And so it felt so much like being especially at UNC Chapel Hill. It was like, well, there's 3 ways you can go. And if you're not doing one of those 3 things, I can't help you. So I thought, well, I'm not going to go to the school of public health because that's the lesser of 3 things. My stubborn self was like, I'm just going to go work for a while. I was out working about 10 years. And then I thought I always wanted to go back to school. Long story short, I took this certificate program in core public health concepts. And I was like, dang it, he was right. This is what I was looking for. So I came to it late, but what I'm grateful for is all of my weird little side roads that seemed not connected to one another fused in that path moving forward. I think the tipping point was getting into the female contraceptive space after I finished my MPH, getting visibility. And I had not thought about it much myself. I just had my own experiences with contraception, which were not ideal. That part really appealed to me. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. We were doing far future female contraceptive human-centered design work for a project. We went to India and Kenya, and we were looking in the classical urban, peri-urban, rural settings. And the women kept saying, what about men? What about men? No, we don't care about women in particular. Think about it more than we realize. Men don't think about it because they don't have something to compare it to. Like it's such a entrenched female thing, contraception. So I think there's a sensitivity for men who are open to contraception to not wanting to talk about it out of like I don't want to step out of bounds kind of thing, right? Like I don't know what the side effects are like, and stepping on that minefield of like, well, maybe I could just contracept is like, oh, cute, or you can use condoms, or so I think that there's a sensitivity for men to be able to step into the conversation. And when you say, oh no, we're working on male contraceptives that you could actually take. At worst, it takes men a minute to catch up because it is so foreign. And then they're like, oh, heck yeah.
Right.
And I have yet to come across someone who was not in favor of it, which has been really, really fun. So this is our big thing, is we joke. So I wish we had started to organize ourselves better with taxi rides and Uber rides, because basically that's where all of our anecdotal comes from, is anecdotal data. Is we'll get in an Uber and the classic question, so what do you do for a living? And so we always joke that we like push up our sleeves and we're like, here we go. Yeah. So we actually talk about it a lot. And in fact, while I'm rambling, I just had it happen again. It happens so much now that I just sort of chuckle. I sold a chair on Nextdoor, and this woman showed up and she was like, it was interesting. She had sent me her name and her LinkedIn profile as a safety measure. And I thought, well, that's good. So I was like, okay, I'm on LinkedIn too. So she shows up and she was like, I'm curious. It says you work for a male contraceptive nonprofit. And I said, yeah. She's like, would you like to go to coffee sometime? She's like, I have thought so much about male contraception. And I was like, and she works in like a data company. So this is the stuff that just putting it out there gets you.
Oh my gosh. That's so cool. Just this everyday conversation. What do you do for work? You mentioned you have some personal experiences like around the concept of contraception. Are you comfortable speaking about them at all?
Yes. I think that's the one thing with this job is boundaries don't exist.
Nice.
Yeah. I think it's important that I do, because I had very bad experiences. I started out on the pill like a lot of women, tons of side effects. I was having headaches and irregular periods. I will confess to being a horribly non-adherent pill taker. So,
I was the worst.
And it is the worst. The only thing I knew about contraception growing up is I heard women in my mom's generation and older talk about the IUD and how they got lost and all of that old lore and challenges with the old IUDs. And so then it was sort of like, well, where do I go from here? My mom had me when she was 19. She was fearful, like beyond the pale for me. It was like, you will contracept. So then she talked to my OBGYN. I remember the three of us were sitting there and she's like, well, let's do Depo because she can get the shot and then I don't have to worry about it. And that was horrible for me. I gained weight. I had my period in reverse. I had it for 3 weeks with 1 week off. And so even my mom was like, it's only birth control because you've gained so much weight and you're cranky all the time. And I was like, So from there, I was getting into college age then. Well, I was in college then. So then I started looking at non-hormonal options. So I got fit for one of the old school, like round diaphragms. And yeah, anyway, so it's been a journey. And then ultimately I got into the field, learned a little bit more about the LNG-IUS, or the levonorgestrel eluting IUD. And I was like, well, I've heard nothing but success from colleagues who had used it. I tried that and it's been the best thing ever for me. I feel like I've gotten a little bit of good karma back. I haven't had my period in 14 years. My friends that have tried it, we're all like, you can pry it out of my body at my autopsy. Like, you are not getting my IUD. But I don't know that I would have felt the same when I was younger. So that's a big part too, is ages and stages, right? The length of time you want to protect yourself and all of those things come into play. And we're definitely thinking about that on the male side too. There's so many lessons we've learned that we should start out doing well in the male side or in developing any new methods. But yeah. But I think the NuvaRing's great too. This is the problem in the developer space. Someone will do a market research study and they'll be like, oh, rings are awful. No one uses rings. I just had this conversation. This is the weird part about my job. I talked to someone about their NuvaRing a week ago. So people like what they like, and you can't just have 3 offerings for people.
Oh, that's so true. When you first heard that male contraceptive research was happening, or even about Male Contraceptive Initiative, what were your first thoughts?
That's an interesting story because the way I was introduced to it was, like I said, I finished my MPH, went to work for a large nonprofit called FHI 360 and worked with their family planning team. You talk about good fortune. I mean, these folks have been through like all of the development, the added element of the HIV crisis and MPT development. So such a knowledgeable base of people. And one of the researchers there was Dr. David Sokol, and pediatrician by training, but had been doing reproductive health research for decades, had lived in Burkina Faso, so had all this experience. And just in passing, we were on a project together, and he was like, yeah, I'm always trying to advocate for male contraception, but the money is so limited that no one even talks about male contraception. And I had the same reaction that I've seen so many other people have, which was like, that's a thing? Like, what do you mean? And so I was telling you about that far future project we were working on. David had retired and started MCI. They had done advocacy and awareness building. So I've known about MCI since the beginning. And everything sort of dovetailed when I was really having my aha moment of like, nobody's listening. Men want these methods. Their partners, we had been just repeating this mantra, men won't use it and women won't trust them. And then I was hearing the exact opposite on the ground. Like, I think there was an ability in the nonprofit sector to sort of say, well, it's cultural differences. And it really isn't. We tend to distill men down to a lowest common denominator across all cultures and forget that there are good guys everywhere and good partners everywhere. And so, it's one of those classic things. I was sitting in a couple's house in a slum of Delhi, and the guy was saying, I just wish there was something I could take so that my wife didn't have to deal with side effects. And I was like, okay, this is just crazy cakes. Why are we not looking at this? Less than 12 months later, there was an executive director position at MCI. One of my colleagues was like, you should apply. And I thought, because I don't have a PhD, I was like, no way. As soon as I started to apply, I was like, this is my dream job. This is too scary. If I don't get this, I'm going to be devastated. So yeah, it's been a journey that's amazing for me as a person, like, I guess personally and professionally, and in the way that I want to leave an impact on the world. It's the whole deal, and such an amazing opportunity. The people in the field are so collaborative. The researchers have been working on this for so long with such limited resources that they're so dedicated that you can't help but want to fight for them. So my job in some ways is so easy because it feels so disconnected from me as a person. I feel like I'm fighting for the researchers. I'm fighting for the people that want these methods. My only job is to try and get money so that it can happen.
I wanted to pull something from what you said when you were sitting in that home in India and how the husband was just like, I wish I could take something. And it reminded me of another conversation I had with a menstrual health educator, Danielle Kaiser. She is developing an app that is targeted towards dads to support their daughters and their wives and partners throughout the menstrual cycle. One of the things that she said was, men are not stupid, they're just clueless. And I was, that is like so good because they just don't know. So you came into MCI. Let's just talk a little bit about the organization. What is the mission and vision for Male Contraceptive Initiative?
The mission is empowering men and their partners to control how many children they want to have. So it is definitely about, we don't promote one child or anything like that. We want people to achieve the reproductive outcomes they want. We are trying to prevent unintended pregnancy, and that's it. But it distills down into our vision statement, which is reproductive autonomy for all. So, there's so many nuances. It's men supporting women, but men being able to protect themselves from unintended pregnancy too, which is something that's a little bit more challenging socially to talk about. For obvious reasons, they don't get pregnant. But there are men that have been sort of subjected to unintended pregnancies because they've had to rely specifically on their female partner. So, yeah, I think that it's interesting coming in talking about male reproductive rights, especially in the US in these times. But it is about reproductive autonomy because we also have to remember women have an unmet need for contraception that's still existing. And there's a space where male contraception will also meet the needs of women, right? Like if their partners are able to contracept reliably, especially with the non-hormonal methods are available for women, it's just adding to the choice. So there's a spectrum. It takes two people to create a pregnancy. So the female end, the male end. And then, but when you realize that there's been really, I know there's condoms and there's vasectomy, but as far as choice, there really is not choice for men. So, and they overlap, right? It's like individuals contracept, couples contracept at the beginning of their family, journey, at the middle of their family journey, at the end of their family journey. There's just all of these different points and places. We've been missing half of that spectrum for 60 years, 70 years at this point, really filling that in. And then you start to realize, especially when you're talking non-hormonals, which is where we focus, you've developed the spectrum, and then you start thinking about folks in the middle. You have trans people that are actually really at risk of unintended pregnancy, but they're not going to want to take hormonal methods because it'll impact them. So there's also, populations that have been completely overlooked that will have an opportunity to hopefully contracept more. So it can go pretty deep pretty quickly. It's socially transforming in the best of ways, I think.
Can you just talk about some of the stigma around male contraception? Like, what have you heard from men everywhere in the world? What's the first thing that they say?
My personal experience, I've talked to men in a couple of different African countries and men in India primarily, and then of course men in the US. And I don't feel like I've ever experienced pushback. I've heard it's always someone else, like, well, I think it would be good, but someone else might not. Or, people in this culture might not. But when you talk to people one-on-one, the men I've spoken to are interested in it and excited about it. Women, I swear, almost 90% of women are like, hell yeah. Like, I think one big difference is generational. We had a great conversation with a small focus group, but it ended up being two guys, me and my colleague, Kevin. They were saying there's a huge generation jump. We were in Bangalore and they were saying their dads and grandfathers wouldn't consider it, but for them, their marriages were much more equal and they wanted to be supportive in the reproductive space and in menstrual health, like all the reproductive areas for their wives as well. So much more engagement, but they don't have the resources. So that's where this concept really was awakened in me of not being able to sit at the table for the conversation. So the reproductive health space, I'll say more broadly, has focused on male involvement in contraception decision making, which is very different. It's like, okay, you are here and we're going to talk about these different methods for women. So that's where I get that sense of men listening more than being able to actually actively participate unless they're looking for something permanent like vasectomy and condoms. But we know the reality of condom use is just not what it's reported to be in most cases. So I do feel like men aren't always thrilled with condoms, and women for that matter. But I just think men have been brought into the conversation, but they don't have the tools to participate. So it's been more of a listening and supportive exercise, which you could argue has contributed to this sort of social evolution. I feel like a lot of the negativity is coming from the top down, so to speak, from clinicians and researchers and folks who tend to lose sight. I don't mean that as indicting as it sounds, but there's a little bit of truth to it that you get into the routine of data and historical experience and blah, blah, blah. And you just sort of do this prescriptive approach, which is, what human-centered design is all about, because it isn't just, the medical space. But I think that's a big part of it, is the folks that are making the decisions about the funding and about the product development are taking this prescriptive approach.
What are they saying? Like, we're talking about like pharmaceutical companies, stakeholders who like are investing in all of this, right? Like, what's their take on it?
So that's a huge story. So the pharmaceutical sector has not been involved in contraceptive product development for upwards of 40 years now. They've stepped out for a myriad of reasons. I don't think there's ever been a paper written where someone is like, this is why pharma left. But the sort of general understanding is that it's a couple of reasons. One, there's if you're looking very black and white, there's a dozen products on the market. So there's quote unquote enough products for women to use, side effects, whatever, and then as far as developing new products, there's the risk benefit ratio. So when you're looking at a large population of people that it's not an illness, you're not treating an illness. So you are taking a healthy population of people, pausing their fertility and needing to guarantee that you will return it without issue. That's a big, that you understand where the risk aversion would come from. Yeah. So I think that when you're looking at things from that perspective, it's like, no thanks. So there's a risk tolerance, and then that's added to by the regulatory pathway is long and expensive for a lot of contraceptive products. Just so in our space, we're looking at a lot of new molecules, new chemical entities. So that takes longer. But even in the hormonal space where you have well-characterized active pharmaceutical ingredients, if you're looking at a long-acting method, you have to follow folks in a clinical trial for that period of time. So generally speaking, there are ways to kind of, fracture it up a bit. But 3 years, actual planned use, then you need to follow people for 3 years, plus, let's say, an additional 6 to 12 months to make sure that they return to fertility. So you're looking at clinical trials that if you look at the front end on recruitment are easily 5 to 10 years. That's expensive. So I think that those factors all weigh in on pharma not being involved. Second, because they've been out of it so long and because it's such an important global issue, the philanthropic and like development sector have been really heavily involved. So the advancements that were made with like Mirena and Jadel, the most recent, generally speaking, products on the female side, those products were developed mostly by public funding from groups like NIH. And then like the nonprofit sector was doing the research around it with big NGOs like Pop Council and FHI 360 and others that were doing that. And then at the end of that road, the products were licensed then back to the pharmaceutical companies because they had the infrastructure for marketing and distribution. So it's that whole pathway of de-risking that you'll hear people talk about. So again, putting on the pharma hat, that makes sense too. Like, okay, there's groups that will eventually get these products to a place where we can take them and add them to our portfolio. That's great. My problem with that is that they price those products in the same calculus that they use for products that they spend the R&D costs on. So the prices aren't mitigated based on, we didn't have to do the R&D on this. So they're still exorbitantly expensive. So for instance, the LNGIUS, like Mirena and derivatives, aren't widely available in low and middle income countries because they're still too expensive, even though the development was completely paid for by entities who had global access in mind. So there's all these sort of pitfalls within the process that make it challenging. So that's the pharma side. And then, so they're not really terribly engaged. They watch, like they come to all of our meetings too, but there's nobody in the pharma sector paying for male contraception right now. We're the second largest funder of male contraception in the world, and we fund 1.25 to 1.5 million a year in research. That's nothing. So the largest funder is NIH.
Okay, so the process that you're speaking about, it sounds like it's almost like, doing research in a university and then like handing it over to a pharmaceutical company to kind of like finish it off in terms of like marketing and stuff like that.
Yeah, with a few more like middle people there, middle organizations. And so then that's where you have some of the overlay. You have people working in the nonprofit space that have worked with social issues, particularly around women's rights, for so many years that they're applying that generally as well. So a lot of female contraceptive development focuses on finding methods that are discreet so women can, contracept without potentially overbearing husbands knowing, because the data from that side of global health practice is addressing a need in women that are trying to control their fertility but may not have the support of their partner. But again, that's not everyone. So the field is so interesting and so different, which is why I think bringing male contraception up into the space now and into the development space presents an opportunity to create almost a whole new market line where it is a socially marketed product, contraception across the board, because pharma companies are set up to behave a certain way. We tend to vilify them because that's an easy route. But the truth is, it's a square peg in a round hole. Their business model is not meant to go country by country looking at sliding scale, what ministries of health can pay, or whatever the case might be, or the nuances of the public versus private sector. So as far as costing, so there's these sort of coarse measures that are taken on, like market shaping and volume guarantees, things like that are not sustainable. Like if we can start out and build an affordable product from the get-go, or tiered pricing, where you charge the exorbitant prices we pay in the West, or especially the US, for products, and then that allows people in LMICs to potentially pay less. But then that can also limit how much. And this is why I was at the University's Allied for Essential Medicines meeting, is I do think there's a model here that could converge nicely and come out of the gate with an affordable product if we can get everybody thinking the same way, and if we can get the funding from the right sources. So right now we're in a critical spot because, as I mentioned, we have 1.25 upwards to maybe 1.5 million a year to spend. That's been great because the pipeline has been early stage products. We have products now entering clinical. They're going to need tens of millions of dollars to make it to market. We don't have that kind of funding, and there's no one there. We just wrote a paper about this actually to really sound the alarm, because I think a lot of the general public assumes that there's, rightfully, I mean, it makes sense, that there's some pharmaceutical entity behind this. And the truth is it's not. It's a handful of people with, insufficient funding. So we can't lose this momentum.
Hey, I wanted to take a quick moment to share a little bit more about today's sponsor, Male Contraceptive Initiative, and why their work is so vital to the world of reproductive health. Male Contraceptive Initiative, or MCI, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the development of new, safe, reversible, and effective male contraceptive options. For far too long, the burden of contraception has largely fallen on women, with limited options available for men, often just condoms or vasectomy. But MCI is working hard to change that by funding groundbreaking research, advocating for reproductive health equity, and driving awareness of male contraceptives. Their mission is all about giving everyone, men and their partners, more options, more control, and more freedom when it comes to family planning. Imagine a world where contraception isn't a one-sided conversation, where men can actively take part in sharing that responsibility. That's what MCI is striving for. What makes their work especially exciting is their focus on non-hormonal reversible methods. We've all heard about the potential challenges women face with hormonal contraceptives, everything from mood swings to more serious health risks. MCI is advocating for solutions that won't disrupt men's hormones, but will still offer effective, reliable contraception. And by doing this, they're addressing a huge gap in reproductive health and bringing us closer to a more balanced and equitable future. Through their funding of innovative research, they're helping push the science forward, making sure that these much-needed options aren't just ideas, but a reality we'll see in our lifetimes. In fact, they're already seeing progress with several contraceptive methods in various stages of development, from pills to gels to devices that could offer men safe, reversible contraception. But it's not just about the science. MCI is also focused on advocacy and education, ensuring that men, couples, and communities understand the importance of male contraceptives and the benefits that they can bring. By supporting public education and policy work, they're helping to break down barriers, foster conversations, and change perceptions about male contraception. And if you want to learn more about the amazing work that they're doing, or even see how you can get involved in supporting this mission, I encourage you to visit their website at malecontraceptive.org. That's malecontraceptive.org. There, you'll find a wealth of resources, from latest research updates to ways that you can help spread the word about the future of male contraceptive options. I am so grateful to Male Contraceptive Initiative for sponsoring this episode and for their commitment to creating a more equitable reproductive health landscape. Their work is truly transformative, and it's thanks to organizations like them that we can hope for a brighter future in global health. Now, without further ado, let's get back to our conversation with Heather Vahdat, the Executive Director of MCI, to hear more about the incredible strides they're making in the world of contraception. So talk about the products that are going into clinical trials right now. Like what do you see that's promising?
That's a great question. Everything is promising. So I've mentioned this a couple of times now. MCI focuses on non-hormonal products. And I think it's important to mention this because people can generalize. But the reason that MCI was set up to focus on non-hormonal is there were already, good scientists doing good work in the hormonal space. So there wasn't the need there to kind of kick that off. To that point, Pop Council and NICHD, which is the National Institutes of Health, Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center for Child and Human. I'm going to totally slaughter that, but NICHD, okay. An agency of NIH. So their intramural program has this wonderful clinical program, and they have been doing the clinical research, supporting the clinical studies for Pop Council, partnering. And that is for a hormonal method that's the testosterone gel. They have just wrapped up phase 2. The data aren't out yet, but all I can say is that we have 2 participants, a participant and his partner, who reached out to us and said, we were in this study. It was awesome. I hate not having a method anymore.
Right.
And that was something that they kept hearing is people would cycle out of the study and say, can we re-enroll? I know one story we heard was a woman who was diabetic, type 1 diabetic, and couldn't use contraception. And so for her partner to be able to contracept was life-changing. And so there were horrible cases of people having to go back to the standard that they were used to and just knowing what could be. So that's heartbreaking in some respects, but hopefully they know it's on the way and they're a part of it. So I think the results of that hormonal study, they're closest to market right now, and it's been very positive. And they've done international studies. So they've been in Kenya, they've been in Europe. I think they have a site in Zimbabwe. So massive global study they've done. And then from our side, the next in line is a product called Atom that's being developed by Contraline. And it's what's known as a vaso-occlusive product. What I like about that product in particular is that it's a nice, easy entree because it has similarities to no scalpel vasectomy. So there's the familiarity of the vasectomy process, both for men and providers. but they liken it to an IUD. So it is a reversible method that you inject a polymer into the vas deferens, and their version biodegrades over a set period of time. And then there's a similar product called Plan A. It was previously known as Vassal Gel. That one is reversed, I believe, with the second injection. Mind you, all of these are still in development, so things evolve. But the gist of it is they're polymers that are injected into the vas and reversed over time. So because those are regulated as devices, it's likely that they will get to market sooner. So for Contraline, they've already been through a first in human study in Australia, and they're continuing to move forward with their clinical work. So we're always hopeful that with something like that, they could be on the market in the 5 to 10 year range, whereas some of the drug products, including the Nesterone testosterone, because it is a drug, are likely more still in the 10-year range, which brings full circle back to the time frame and how that can be daunting to investors and pharmaceutical companies.
Which was it the Vasogel? Is that the one that men would rub the gel on their shoulders? Which one was that?
That's the Nesterone testosterone.
Oh, okay, got it.
So that's the Nest-T gel. And apparently that's, the delivery system was acceptable, highly acceptable. But again, that's why you need a variety of products, because that approach, that delivery system might not work for everyone. But I think men have responded very well to it. So that's the gel that you rub on your shoulders. And then there's the vaso-occlusives. And then next in line is a product. Well, it doesn't have, right now it's still got a very technical name. It's YCT529. So Your Choice Therapeutics. And that's kind of interesting because the actual molecule behind that was developed by a researcher at the University of Minnesota that was one of our grantees. And then Your Choice is one of our grantees. So we've really been able to watch that product progress to the point that I literally went with them to the first human taking that pill in the UK. So they just did a first in human study in the UK at the end of 2023. So Gunda Georg from the University of Minnesota, who developed the molecule, Akash Bakshi and Nadja Manowitz, who are, the CEO and chief science officer at Your Choice, were there, and they invited me to come. And I was like, you know what? Heck yeah, I'm going to be there. And so we were there to watch this guy take this pill, and it was very cool. So that is an oral pill. And then another product that's not in clinical yet, but that got a lot of attention last year it's a SAC inhibitor, so small SAC. So it stands for soluble adenylyl cyclase. And it's being developed out of Weill Cornell, but has been spun out into a company called Sasol Pharmaceuticals. And they are developing an on-demand method, which is very cool. So a man could take this a couple of hours before he goes out, and then he has protection for X number of hours, and then the return to fertility happens very quickly. So I not only think that would be a cool, appealing method for the market in general, I think it also will be a faster route to regulatory approval because of the quick offset. So there's all sorts of cool stuff.
It sounds like a reverse plan B.
Yes, exactly. Well, and
it's like before instead of after.
Yes. Or you could do both, right? Yeah. And that's the thing. Oh my gosh, that's the other thing is I think this is becoming less of an issue, but I still feel like it's important to say when you're talking about male contraception, it's not either or. It's not like men contracept and women stop contracepting. This is like both people can contracept, which is huge. So I don't know. I could go on for days. Seriously, it's so interesting and exciting to talk about on so many levels. And that's just the surface. There's a whole pipeline of products in development. So
that is so exciting. I wanted to kind of go into the realm of having it go global, and it's interesting because when you hear something like male contraception, when I heard your presentation, you were like, this is something that could fight poverty. This could be something that really makes a difference and helps people move out of poverty in these low and middle income countries. Like, can you talk a little bit more about how a male contraceptive could really pave the way for this?
there's already, well-established data in the literature about how family planning has contributed to smaller family sizes, and it just sort of, it's all domino. So it's being able to have children complete, their education, particularly girls. Like that was something that was a challenge before. So it's all around unintended pregnancy. So, if a family wants to have 5 children and they feel they have the means for that, that's great. But for people who haven't been able to manage their families in the way that they would like, there's a huge, downstream benefit economically from an education standpoint, all of those things. If you're trying to feed a large family that you weren't prepared for, you're continuing a cycle of poverty. And it's very hard for folks to get out of that. But there's been demonstrated proof that being able to have reproductive autonomy, and in this case, I feel like what contributes is not just men being able to contracept, because those data that we have are skewed too. It's important to note that a lot of the pregnancy data that we have is based on reports from married women. So there's a huge part of the population that isn't, women that end up pregnant outside of marriage. So anyway, so you have women able to contracept, women who can't contracept or have issues with existing contraception, which is an important time to jump in and say male contraception is super exciting, but we still need to improve upon female contraception. And then if their partners can contracept, it's that dual protection kind of idea. So so reducing unintended pregnancy rates that's the fundamental part in my mind, is allows folks to continue to achieve their educational targets and desires, allows them to enter the workforce, just frees up their lives in the way that they see and desire it to be. It feels so fundamental, it's hard for me to even put words to. It's just having the ability to control your life in so many ways. And just with affordability and access, it's still not something that's achievable for a lot of people around the world. And that's frustrating because it should be. And that's another part of why I think the space is ripe for a complete disruption of how products are developed and marketed and priced. And I just think because of the unique nature and sort of ubiquitous nature of the contraceptive market, we should start from scratch and develop, again, a market that meet the demands of the products and the populations that will be using them.
Have we done any studies or anything in these low resource settings?
Yes. I'm glad you asked. I should have mentioned that. It's so important. So we, one of our partners, well, it was a consortium of partners. So Desireline and Outside for Development, and it'll come to me. There's a third group that's involved in this that I adore. And why can I not think of them right now? Anyway, they did market research across 7 countries, including the US. And the results were so amazing. And I've got them up in front of me so I can cheat because they're also so prolific. They got so much information. So the folks that carried this out were Estonia Impact, who are based in India, Outside for Development, which is sort of a collaboration between a couple of groups, and then Desireline, all who do like global market research work. So they went into Bangladesh, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ivory Coast, Kenya, Nigeria, Vietnam, and the United States. And they did this exhaustive survey, and they used a methodology called discrete choice. So it wasn't just going in and saying, would you use a male contraceptive? Yes or no. It was walking men and women through, okay, here are product attributes. It's sort of like that game, Kiss, Marry, Kill, or whatever. So you go through and you say, okay, I could tolerate this or whatever. And then, so that brought them down to this sort of, I'm going to say, method that they would relate to. So like, okay, here's a method that you have sort of described as something that you would use. And then the questions go from there. So like, if this were available on the market, how soon would you use it after it was on the market? So the line in the sand that they drew was like within the first 12 months. So within the first 12 months, 76% of men in Bangladesh said that they would use it. 70% of men in Nigeria and Vietnam said that they would use it. 62 and I think 64% in Cote d'Ivoire and DR Congo, respectively, said they would use it. So huge percentage. And these are about 2,000 men surveyed in each of these countries. So, I mean, nothing to shake a stick at. Like it's actually really compelling data. And, you know, it goes back to that point of this sort of global sector mentality of, oh, men, the machismo won't let them, you know, limit their family size or whatever. And it's not showing up in the data.
And these men, are they all married, or is it just like a random pick? Yeah, because it's just interesting, because when you think about it, if you're like an unmarried man in like a place like India or Bangladesh, I'm sure you don't want to have children with like 7 different women, you know, and all of that.
Right. So it was a survey of sexually active men in, let's see, the inclusion criteria. The men had to be between the ages of 18 and 60, have had sex with at least one woman in the past 12 months, and able to father children based on self-report, except if they underwent a vasectomy, then that was noted as well. But so it was not, marriage was not a criteria.
Yeah, so that's interesting too.
And you will still hear people say that, less so, but even when I first came to MCI, you know, there was this sort of mandate of, you know, we'll only talk about this in the context of married people. And I'm like, the heck we will. Like, we have to break through that. I mean, that is so old at this point that we think people who aren't married aren't having sex. Like, that's just, and luckily I feel like we're seeing less and less of that. But, you know, young people are going to be the ones who are jumping on this, ready to use this. We talk about that all the time. It's not me or anyone that I work with that will be able to use these methods. They're for the next generation. So that's also an important part of what we do. We have a youth advisory board. We try to get the voice of young people involved wherever we can, because it's their products.
Yeah. I was literally just about to ask you about that, you know, about your youth advisory board. And do these, I want to say, quote unquote, kids, you know, the youth, do a lot of them like just have stories in terms of like, this is an organization that I really want to get involved with because of X, Y, and Z? What are they saying?
The youth advisory board continues to just blow me away. So it's young people from all over the world. We have representation from a couple of countries in Africa. I'm trying to remember it, because it actually had to break into 2 things. So there's now sort of this I forget what the second board is called, but it's sort of the precursor. So it gives folks a chance to serve for a year and sort of earn their way onto the board. But the majority, it's intellectual interest and social interest. So I haven't heard people talk about their personal experiences being a driver as much as, especially for young men, finding out like young men are coming up assuming is an option for them. And then when they find out it's not, they're mad. So it's like, well, wait, why don't I have contraceptive options? So it's from a place of action, I think, is where they're really coming from. Like, what can we do to make this a reality? This is nonsense that this doesn't exist. So it's what I like about the Youth Advisory Board, aside from just having their voices and their input, is it's allowed us to start a secondary grant mechanism. They have their own grant now, because a couple of the Youth Advisory Board members, as undergrads, were doing research in the space and there was no funding for them. So our traditional grant opportunities are for, you know, there's a fellowship that if you're a graduate student or a doctoral student or a postdoc, you can apply for, but nothing for undergraduates. And we've had undergraduates and high school students. We have high school students. There's 2 high school students out of Canada that were just phenoms, and they have gone and they've spent summers at some of our grantee institutions learning laboratory techniques. And so when I say these folks are motivated, it's not just sort of I'm blown away. I always tell them that I'm just keeping the seat warm for them because I can't compete with them. They are so smart and so much less apathetic. I think that, not to be so hard on my generation, but we just weren't dealing with the social issues that they're dealing with. Like they're really embracing the fact that they have to kind of fix things in the world. So they're amazing.
Yeah, and I think fix things in the world and in so many different aspects. It's crazy.
Right. I mean, I have to say what comes to mind for me right away is the marches on gun control and things like talking about school shootings here in the US, like seeing them active and demonstrating and being vocal. That's not something we've seen at that large of a scale out of a young generation, I feel like, in quite some time. So at least, again, in my bias is towards what I've seen in the US, but just the doers, the action for change kind of mentality, I think is really a little bit more broad than I've seen in the past.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, if you're listening to this and you're a student and you never even knew about this, and this is something that is really interesting to you, just reach out because I'm sure, Heather, you could use all of the help that,
yes.
Wow.
It's true. So we're 5 people at MCI. That's such an important point.
It's so mind-blowing to me, the 5 people. Gosh.
Yeah, and one is part-time. And so that's the other thing is when we bring in students and interns, we give them, and I don't know, this might be the standard practice now, but so Logan and our colleague Kevin, so Logan's our chief research officer and he manages our portfolio, but we've all worked together for 6 years now. So when I first started, Logan was the number 1 employee. He had been here for not quite a year when I joined. And then I brought Kevin on, who had a background in human-centered design and comms, and we sat down and sort of visualized how we wanted MCI to operate. And one of the components was bringing in young people and giving them meaningful opportunities, because we had all had like internships and fellowships where we were doing copy work and stuff. And, so for instance, we had 2 UNC summer public health fellows, and one created a advocacy brief for us, like a policy brief on getting vasectomy covered under the Affordable Care Act that we will absolutely use. Another one did some data collection in her home country and a literature review. So you're contributing in ways as a young person that also build it's important to us that your career skills are also, we don't want to just take, you are a part of this organization. So let's contribute in a way that you can look back and be proud and show people and be like, see that on their website? I did that. So yeah, please reach out to us. Actually, anyone. I mean, that's the nice part about being a small organization is we engage with donors sometimes too, who just want to ask us about stuff. And I know there's places that I donate to and I'm like, well, I wish I could kind of ask them,
have a
ins
conversation.
And outs question.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, if you send something, I mean, spoiler alert, if you send something to contact at Male Contraception, you're getting one of the 5. I mean, there's no hiding for us at all. We're all here.
Wow, it's so cool. What are you most excited about in the next 5-6 months?
I feel like literally there's a Rolodex in my head going. So the first thing that comes to mind is the German government is releasing their first tranche of funding under the line item contraceptive research and development for all genders. I'm super excited by that. So it's a 5 million euro budget line item that they are going to put out a call for proposals this year. They're trying to, I mean, it's new for them, so they're building it up. We have a great advocacy partner in Europe called Better Birth Control. They're based in Berlin, and they've really been the driver behind getting all this to happen. So I'm really excited to see an ex-US partner that we can work with. And then I'm just excited about the regulatory space, oddly enough, things I never thought I'd hear. It's like saying I'm excited about paying my taxes, but really
it's so
like the
important.
It is. And there's so many opportunities, so we're trying to understand how we can make sure that we're addressing all of the FDA requirements. And but we're also exploring, the European Medicines Agency, and they've been doing really neat work with the African Medicines Agency. So a big focus for us is, and I say this generally because we aren't specifically developing any products, of course. We are grant makers and we are advocacy champions. We are, what do we folks call us? The ecosystem coordinator. But that's because we can go off and do these things so that the researchers can do the research. So one of our big things is parallel introduction, which is this idea of, instead of introducing a product in the West and then giving it 10 plus years before it maybe filters into LMICs, low and middle income countries, that we can do it in parallel. So if you're working with someone like the African Medicines Agency, which has really been doing so much work to kind of launch, and I think they've been sort of officially launched since last year, what can we do to support that and be a part of that and make this a global product right out of the gate, or these global products right out of the gate? So those conversations energize me to no end. And then I have to say, literally meeting you and talking to you has been exciting in the context of what you're doing in the global health space. And I love the Reese's peanut butter cup of the world, right? Like when the chocolate and the peanut butter come together and it's like, oh my gosh, we can do so much together. And so those aspects I really, really like.
I just love it. Heather, this has been so fun to just learn from you. I think the last 4 or 5 months, I totally binged the MCI podcast, season 1 of MCI's podcast, which I will link in the description. And all of this stuff is so cool and new, and it's not new. Research has been happening since 1970, but it's new to me, and it's new to all these people listening today. They're gonna look at the title and be like, male contraception, what is that? So I'm just so excited to have my listeners learn from you and hopefully get involved, because this just is such an important space. So Heather, how can people get in contact with you? How can people learn a little bit more about MCI?
So our website, of course, is a great resource. The market research that I was referencing earlier is available on there. There's tons of resources, but it's just malecontraceptive.org. And then you can email me directly. It's heather@malecontraceptive.org. Not a very coded system. So we're very reachable. We have social media presence. So Facebook and Instagram, and occasionally we try to embarrass ourselves on TikTok because we're all old. But yeah, so any of those ways are the best ways to reach us. And, we are very open to conversations, and there's no way to say it other than we need support to continue to demonstrate the demand, and also to just make sure that these products keep on the trajectory they're on to make, you referenced our podcast. I think the reason we wanted to do that is to explain why it's taken so long, because there have been so many fits and starts related. There's never been consistent funding. So we want to make sure we can break that this time, because this is just really gained a critical speed where we're actually headed to market. So yeah, reach out to us anytime. And I can't thank you enough for bringing us to your audience. It's a real honor to have them listen if they haven't switched the channel yet. I hope that.
Yeah, they're not switching any channel. Okay. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you. It was, again, Hetal, what you're doing is amazing. So thank you for all you do in the global health space. We're just one small part of it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to learn more about today's topic and guest, head over to the show notes linked in the description of this episode. There, you can get access to resources, links, and ways you can get involved in the pursuit for global health. And if you loved this episode, don't forget to write me a review on Apple Podcasts and rate the podcast on Spotify. It helps me get in front of more people just like you and continues to elevate the causes we are so passionate about. I'll see you in the next one.